Hi, and welcome to another edition of Studio 411. I'm your host, Larry Dasilva. Thank you for joining us. And we have a returning favorite joining us here this afternoon, Melanie Young, a certified health coach. I get choked up just thinking about Melanie and all she's been through. Breast cancer survivor and author of several books, most notably Getting Things Off My Chest, A Survivor's Guide to Staying Fearless and Fabulous in the Face of Breast Cancer. And she'll tell me what the other one was. I think the other one was what? What was the other one, Melanie?
The second book is Fearless, Fabulous You.
Yes, thank you.
Lessons on living life on your terms.
There you go. There she is. And there is the aforementioned author and overall good egg, Melanie Young. Thank you for joining us, Melanie. How you been?
I'm great, Larry. It's great to see you.
Thank you. Yes, we still want to get her here in studio, but I'm telling you, and Melanie, by the way, is joining us from Tennessee today. Jet setter she is, New York based, but Tennessee is your home, correct?
Right. I'm born and raised in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Yeah. Now, did you? I have to ask, when you go back home for any length of time, is there an accent or something that you affect, or you find yourself slipping back into?
Well, Larry, what are you talking about?
Oh, okay. So a little Blanche Devereaux or Rue McClanahan to my left here. There you go. All right, much to talk about. You recently had a magazine piece. Tell me, called "Caring for Caregivers" in a magazine called PainPathways.org. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Pain Pathways actually is a glossy as well as an online magazine geared toward the medical profession and people who are in the health and wellness arena. So probably not widely read, but the topic was very widely of interest. And what it's about is the importance of taking care of yourself when you are caring for a loved one. And I spoke from the heart on this piece, Larry, because my grandmother, Rose, I called her Mimi. She was caring for my grandfather who had metastasized prostate cancer some years ago, and she forgot to take care of herself, and she died of a massive heart attack.
Right, and I can relate as I read the article, because even some family members on my wife's side, same thing, that where there was someone with crippling arthritis, among other ailments, and then while that individual ultimately passed at the ripe old age of 96, so really nothing to complain about there, but the lingering effects on the spouse, were pretty severe, and that, went through a lot, and I'm sure a lot of it, just from the stress level alone, was as a result of having to be this 24/7 caregiver to this spouse.
Absolutely. And they, unfortunately they say that the patient survived and the caregiver died. And that's kind of what happened with my grandmother. And then when my father was dying of cancer, I saw my mother being run ragged. And she said to me, I don't want to end up like my mother. And then I had to care for my husband, who was hospitalized. Thankfully, he's okay, but hospitalized in 2016 at the fall. And I also had to realize I had to take care of myself because I actually fainted in the hospital from stress. Yeah. So the reality is that many of us will be in the situation where our role will be caregiver. We are not trained to be caregivers, and it will become one of the most important roles of our life. But we don't really have, we learn on the job, and many caregivers are women.
I was going to say, you led right into my next point. 66%, according to the article, are women, so not surprised. Frankly, I thought it would have been higher, but and also 29% of the U.S. population provide for someone who's chronically ill, disabled, aged, which was the case in the story I told you. So again, I wonder too, in terms of facilities where now the individual I spoke to you about is now rest home, whatever they want to call them. They try to give them fancy names. What the percentage in this country of folks that are in those situations? I mean, it's got to be in the millions.
It is. It's a very serious matter, especially with our aging population. So, and also the fact that so many people seem to be chronically ill. I don't have statistics, but we all know there's an incredible rise in autoimmune deficiencies. We all know that many of us are dealing with aging parents because it's just a natural progression. The baby boomers are older, and there's more of them. And, many of my peers have found themselves in the position of caregiving. And I see their stress. I feel their stress. And I've done a lot of interviews and written a lot about this and hosted shows on this because I think it's very important. And the most important thing is it is, yes, a very important role, and caregiving is important for a loved one, but it should never get to the point where it negatively impacts your own health.
Absolutely. Melanie Young joining us here for the hour on Studio 411. I neglected to say, of course, Melanie hosts two nationally syndicated iHeart radio shows, Fearless, Fabulous You on the Women for Women Network, as well as the Connected Table Live, along with her husband, David Ransom, correct?
Yes.
And also a contributor, besides periodicals that we spoke of, also to the Huffington Post Healthy Living section as well. So one busy young lady. But would you agree that staying busy keeps your mind sharp and your health in better straits, or do you think you need to slow down a little bit?
That's a really interesting question. I definitely think staying busy is important for your mind at all ages, particularly as you go older, because there's nothing, I think, much like your muscles in your body, when you don't use them, they get flaccid and you become weak. And I think your mind is a giant muscle, and you always have to be exercising it. As for slowing down, I do feel also it's important to create balance in your life and give yourself permission to take time off. You don't always have to be on. I am often guilty of always being on, and one of my biggest challenges has always been letting go. But I've learned to do it because you just have to. It's just natural to be able to take care of yourself as much as take care of everybody else. But I like being busy.
And you discussed when you were here with us a little over a year ago how you spent, obviously migrated to New York City, built up a career, a business there, and then due to some of the health issues and other factors in your life, the loss of your dad, among other things, you then decided you're going to move to the country, which you did, and that's a good balance. And
it's a wonderful balance.
She loves the snow while it's falling off her back deck, folks. It's amazing. There's always a video of Melanie and her back deck, so we love that. We love to see that. I can tell she's relaxing when I see things like that. Speaking of health benefits, let's talk a little about coconut oil. That's something that you're a big proponent of, correct?
Yes, I love coconut oil. I actually use it more on my body than in my body. I think it's a phenomenal makeup remover for everywhere, and also for a moisturizer. So I use it 3 ways on my skin. I remove my makeup. I also use it mixed with some salts or sugar as a light scrub. It's great with sugar. I put more sugar on my body than in my body. And then I moisturize with it. Now I also do cook with it in stir fries.
So here I had all these benefits: hair loss or hair health, treats pancreatitis, Alzheimer's disease, bone health, digestion, strengthened immune system, and they claim does have some advantages as far as preventing liver and kidney disease. But now you took it from the external part. That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. So
I actually do. I mean, you do have to realize coconut oil, all oil, whether it's coconut oil, olive oil, peanut oil, it's about 1 tablespoon is about 120 calories. So it's all the same calories. But coconut oil is higher in saturated fat. So you do have to be a little careful about that because it's not the healthiest fat. So you need to always use oil in moderation in your cooking, and you got to be very careful with your coconut oil. But it is a wonderful flavoring. We particularly like it in stir fries and in rice to give it a little more Asian taste. But we still, in our intake of oil, still stay with olive oil, which we think is just the best.
Oh, olive oil for sure. Again, being from my heritage, just like olive oil and red wine vinegar with salads, with potatoes, with any number of things, and it just, people using the butter and the margarine. And again, it's I like that to a degree, but no, when it comes to some of those other things, nothing beats olive oil.
It's the best. It's also good on your skin. It's also
really?
A great moisturizer.
There you go. Have to wrap yourself up. A little shrink wrap will do the trick. Otherwise, zing. I heard somebody did that years ago, a celebrity, and literally they kept sliding off the bed. So I don't even want to know what those sheets and pillowcases must have looked like. they would just cover themselves supposedly in olive oil, and I don't know. I don't think it was Sophia Loren, but it was somebody.
Well, you shrink wrap it. I actually did it when I was a young girl, I have to confess, and I shrink wrap myself in saran wrap because supposedly you sweat it out. I think it was stupid. I'll be honest with you. If you want to lose weight, watch your diet and exercise. Don't put yourself in saran wrap. But that said, David, my husband, does say I smell like a coconut when I go to bed.
Okay. Now, what about coconut? Do you big fad the last 5 or 10 years with drinking coconut juice? Are you a fan of that?
I do. No? It's provided though I do watch the sugar because there is sugar, but there are some coconut waters, they're called, that I love and drink, and they're really good for replenishing your electrolytes if you've worked out. So they're really great, and they're a wonderful alternative still than to sugary sodas. I still believe in drinking water with lemon or oranges or limes or cucumber, which is a low-calorie, no-sugar way to hydrate, but coconut water is good. You always just have to look at the labels and see what the sugar content is.
I'm getting hungry just having this conversation, but I will segue into my next food item. Melanie recently did a blog on the benefits of one of my favorites, pumpkin pie. So do you recall that? Yeah, I heard it arouses men though. So we'll talk food health and also what's the deal with that? It's like, I don't know. I don't think it's working on that end with me. I don't know. I'm only getting aroused for more pumpkin pie.
Well, it has not necessarily worked in my bedroom, but there was some goofy study. There's always a goofy study out there that says something or something out there, and you always have to take some of it with a grain of salt and dig deep about the efficacy. In this case, pumpkin pie stimulating your sexuality could be for some people. They also say that if you put spice, odor, and aromas like a bake of pumpkin pie in your house when you're selling it, people will be more interested in maybe buying your house. So basically, pumpkin and the scent of pumpkin pie is a stimulus that people find appealing. They also find apple pie appealing.
Again, all good stuff, and it's probably too much, but again, I try to, in moderation, as we said before. Speaking of moderation, now again, each year, of course, folks go and they make, I don't per se. I think I just try to, advance myself, make myself a better person, whatever if you want to call that a resolution. But we have the craziness with New Year's resolutions, and you have, I guess, wrote an article recently on New Year's resolutions, and tell us a little bit about how you feel about folks making these endless resolutions, and then within the first month they're all broken. They've all failed.
Well, I think that New Year's resolutions are a healthy thing because it's always important to look ahead and to learn from the past year and reflect and think about how you want to shape your year. But you also have to make realistic goals. I mean, you can't say I'm going to, there's bucket lists and wish lists, and then there's realistic lists. And I always say, come up with a few things. Don't overlist yourself so you suddenly find yourself burdened with having to make too many changes. Start with small steps and do things that you really can accomplish. People always say, I want to lose weight. That's a big one. I want to lose weight, or I want to make more money, or I want to get a new job, or whatever. Think about that and think about how you're going to do it versus then put something else on the list. I very rarely say, my New Year's resolution is always the same one over and over again. Number one is I want to, have as little stress in my life as possible and have as much balance and time for myself because I know I tend to add on a lot of stuff. So my big one for this year has been to take away and to pare down in my life and in my home and focus on just the few things that matter. But I think you need to be realistic, but also it's good to have, I call it, there's wistful thinking and wishful thinking, and it's good to have both, but don't set yourself up for disappointment to say, I failed, I didn't accomplish anything.
And sometimes some of these things take time. So again, one should not always, but I do like yours. It's kind of a broad-based one. And again, it's not something that, you're going to beat yourself up if perhaps it takes longer. It's almost one of those that isn't necessarily, I've already failed in the first month. No, it's kind of a year-long process, in some cases, a long-term process. So, and it's, as you said, got life balance, health, et cetera, and that's good, very good. You brought up bucket lists, bucket list trip. What would be With world traveler that you are, where would be your bucket list trip? One place that you have not been to?
You know, I'm so fortunate in my life that I have traveled so much to so many places around the world. My big fantasy, I'll be honest with you, is this. I want to live around the world for 1 year, 4 weeks, 6 weeks most, in a different place around the world.
This is with David or without David?
Well, hopefully David will come with me. I've already warned him. It's kind of like the eat, drink, pray, but mine will be eat, drink, play.
Yes.
And I want to just immerse myself 4 weeks, a different place around the world for 1 year. And so and where would that be? I would probably center on the southern hemisphere because, you know, and follow the season, follow the sun. I've been a lot of wonderful places, so it's really at some point going back and seeing more of some of the same, like more of Asia. David's not been. Eastern Europe have not been. Of course, we got to watch the politics, but Eastern Europe not been, and that would be very fascinating to me. Dig deeper into regions of France where I've not been. But really, the ultimate bucket list before I die is to live around the world for 1 year.
There you go. Wow. Talk about.
I have friends who've done that.
Yes.
I have friends who've done that.
Talk about a broad-based, bucket list. That is terrific. I love it. Melanie Young joining World Traveler. We'll add that to her resume. Joining us for the hour on Studio 411. MelanieYoung.com for more information. As we said before, radio shows on the iHeart Radio Network. Fabulous. I'm sorry, I'll get this right. It's like a tongue twister, folks. Fearless, Fabulous You and the Connected Table Live. Also, Mighty Melanie on Twitter. Melanie Fabulous on Instagram and Facebook. Fearless, Fabulous Melanie. There's nowhere not to see her, okay? Just don't try like I do to get her on the phone because you won't get her. It'll be like, I'm busy, I can't talk. Because she's trying to kind of pare down what she's doing. But no, otherwise, just a host of activity. She's like a whirlwind, folks, let me tell you. All right, serious subject, something that yes. I know, I don't know what to call. I'm not a groupie, I'm not a follower, but I think just people that you read about or got to see on films and television of some note or talent, when they pass, it kind of strikes you a little bit. In 2016, we lost a lot of people, but one that really hit home, and I think would fit well in this conversation, was Patty Duke, who died from an overlooked and potentially lethal condition that I think a lot of us don't understand, called sepsis. And I just want to know if there was any thoughts on that, or kind of
yes.
help explain to those of us who may not understand exactly what, in her case or in general cases, led to this or could lead to that demise from that illness.
Well, just the word sepsis just created goosebumps up and down my arms, Larry. Sadly, and I have great respect for hospitals and the medical profession, but unfortunately, you can also, I have seen this happen before, you can get sick going to the hospital and undergoing a procedure. It just happens. And in Patty Duke's case, as I recall, she'd had a procedure and she developed sepsis, which is a fatal infection. A septic infection that can occur. Often it is airborne, and you can get it often after a procedure, but also in a hospital. And there's also something called a staph infection. They're related. So I think sepsis and a staph infection are the same. But when you get them, they can be very, very serious. And you need to seek immediate treatment because it can get into your blood system and it can make your organs shut down. And that's what happened. And it's very tragic when that does happen. I know that many years ago, Rosie O'Donnell got a staph infection, and it was a front page. And so they can be treated, but sepsis is worse. Sepsis is much, even more lethal. I have had some friends who've gotten staph infections in the hospital. And I actually got sick from an endoscopy last year. I had an endoscopy, and I was going in thinking about Joan Rivers, who died from hers.
I was going to say, yeah. But that was more medical malpractice, correct? Like in Joan's case? Okay.
Right. In my case, there was no malpractice. It was a perfectly normal procedure. But I was as I was sitting in that suite. They called it an endoscopy suite. There were patients all around, everywhere, stretchers, gurneys, everywhere, hacking away, coughing. And I just knew in my heart and head I was going to get sick. I just felt it. I just said, if I get sick, it's going to be because I've been around all these people coughing. And I had my scarf up over like this, and I still got sick. I got very bad bronchitis. So you just have to be careful. And I did last year. I did a show on germs and cold and flu and bronchitis and contracting, because in the winter in particular, it's high season for that. You've got to be vigilant. You have to wash your hands. Keep everything clean. Don't share utensils. Don't share your phone. Don't do selfies. People put their heads together when they do selfies, and they go like this, and they don't realize that they're sharing germs that way. Mm-hmm. So you just have to really think hard about it, and just be aware that when you're in a hospital, you're there to get well, but you got to make sure that you keep everything as sanitized as possible. And if somebody's coming to visit you, make sure they are not sick at all, or they must wear a medical mask, a surgical mask.
I was talking to you off air before we started the taping. A member of my family recently had a knee replacement, and it's interesting how they handle that now just in the last 5 or 6 years. Now, obviously it's not a routine surgery, but what happens now is a lot of times they want to get the patient home. They don't want to send you to a rehab facility.
Right.
But yet we had a neighbor a few years older than the person in my family, but then she wound up going to a facility, and everything, knock on wood, was fine. But again, it was just interesting how the more I read about it, that they're definitely trying to get people well and get them out of the out of the hospital and not into a facility that probably is more germ infested than even the hospital. These recovery
Well, I would
centers.
rather be at home. I mean, the thing is, you also have to germ-proof your home. If you've had surgery or you have a loved one who's ill, you need to make sure that your house is completely sanitized. Same thing. And if you have dogs, and I write about this in my book, Getting Things Off My Chest, which preps women when they go in for breast cancer surgery, you got to prep your home. If you have a dog, it's got to be clean. It's got to be completely groomed. No shedding. You have to make sure your bedding is clean, that you have fresh towels, that you have hand sanitizers everywhere. Hand sanitizers are important. They're also, could dry out the heck out of your hands, so you want hand cream, but you've got to do that. But I would rather go home than stay in a hospital any day of the week, unless I was very, very ill and then I needed to be in the hospital.
Oh, absolutely. Because then, even though nowadays you have like a care that comes to the home, it's still not a buzzer or a pull cord away. Unfortunately, now by the time you get somebody, they've just been to see you, or in some cases they may not come back to see you for 2 days. That's not going to work. So we totally get it. Melanie Young joining us for the hour here on Studio 411. For more information on all that Melanie is up to, as well as her radio show, books, etc., melanieyoung.com. We have a shot, if we can pull it up, a story I read that really tugged at my heart. Two actually. Well, we'll get to the second one, but anyway, the first one was participating in the Komen Greater New York Road Race for the Cure. I know you've done that for several years. We have a shot of you in full regalia, so that must be quite an experience each year for you.
It is, Larry. I have great respect for the Susan G. Komen organization. I support, being in New York, the New York chapter. Linda Tantawi, the president, is a very dear friend of mine, and they raise money to provide grants for nonprofits that serve underserved communities throughout Greater New York. And that's so important, because I don't think people realize how many, breast cancer affects all women of all backgrounds and ethnicities. And sadly, there are certain backgrounds and ethnicities that are more deeply affected, and they have more aggressive cancers. And the first, course of action is to make sure that you get your mammograms and you have your the education that you need to know what you need to do and by what age, and understand your family history. So these wonderful nonprofits that the Susan G. Komen organization supports raises money for that through the Race for the Cure, which is a wonderful race. And you see a sea of pink, and there's teams, and you just feel a groundswell of support, and you realize how many people, men and women, are affected by breast cancer. I mean, as the statistics are, 1 in 8 women will be diagnosed. 40,000 still die of breast cancer, and while the survivor rate is somewhat better and far better than it was many years ago, anyone who dies of breast cancer is too many.
Sure, absolutely. Do you kind of, I mean, I'm sure you work out and you do a lot of stuff during the year, but I mean, is that
Yes.
something that when you get 2 months out now you start like maybe ramping up your walking, your running, et cetera? Is that kind of you go into a program of your own or no?
No. Well, first of all, I walk.
Okay.
I don't run. And second, I walk every day. I believe that, well, it's a fact. It is a medical fact that exercise, regular exercise, is essential for everybody's health and for someone, and it's very essential for reducing your risk of breast cancer. And as a survivor, it's very important for reducing your risk of a recurrence. Daily exercise. So I walk regularly. I walk with my husband. I walk by myself and listen to music. I walk, and walking is the easiest and least expensive way to get healthy cardiovascular exercise.
Sure.
So I don't need to prep because I'm already in good shape.
Already ready to go. Puts on her pink and she's good to go, as you saw in that picture. That's
Yeah.
terrific. Now, the story I was going to get to before we talked about that was something, and we do have a shot of this image that I guess was given to you as part of this, and you'll know what I'm talking about. Tell me about your Windows of the World story leading up to the tragic events of 9/11/2001 and your work afterwards. But again, we have an image of it. It looks kind of like a boomerang. Again, tell us about that.
Well, Larry, I was privileged for many years to work with the great late Joe Baum, who was, he basically resurrected, he basically created Windows on the World. He also resurrected the legendary Rainbow Room. He was a restaurant impresario. He helped create the late Four Seasons restaurant. So I worked with him on many occasions and did many wonderful programs at Windows on the World. And in 2001, in the spring of 2001, I was hired, my company at the time was called M. Young Communications, and we were hired to work on the 25th anniversary of Windows on the World. And we were going to do a big party. I wanted to have couples renew their vows. And we did a lot of meetings and plannings at the restaurant, which was the tallest tower in New York and the highest restaurant in America. And then we decided that we were going to postpone all the festivities until the new wine cellar was going to be finished, because Windows on the World had one of the greatest wine cellars in the world. And we were going to do the celebration probably in like October, November. But unfortunately, as we all know, history took its course, and the terrorist attacks destroyed the towers and killed many, many people.
Sure.
Many, many people. And I knew, fortunately, the people I worked with were not killed. All the people I worked with survived, but there were so many more Windows on the World who did die. And we created, in memory of those, and to help their families, the survivors, raise money to help the children become educated, we created the Windows of Hope Family Relief Fund. And it was a giant effort. It started in the food and beverage industry, but groundswelled, and it has raised millions of dollars to help the families of food service workers who were killed, not only at Windows of the World, but any food service worker whose family was affected, because it wasn't just Windows of the World. Other restaurants were destroyed as well. And it has sent a lot of children to college. And we did a big fundraiser exactly 1 month after, it was October 11th. Anywhere in the world, restaurants could donate a percentage of their sales to Windows of Hope.
Terrific.
So it was a very horrible time for everybody, and that was one bright light out of it, is we were able to help a lot of people.
We had a guest on, and in fairness to her, I won't say who she was, but again, I don't think she would have an issue with it, but I always found it fascinating. She was living and teaching in the New York area at the time at a university, and she developed, and is still with us as we tape, a form of cancer, but not that she was looking for the payouts or whatever that came with this, but she was deemed that she was beyond the 7-mile radius. And I remember asking her, I said, well, it's interesting, when there's a bonfire or a building on fire or a gas leak, guess what? Those fumes and that smoke, they don't know to stop at 7 miles, So, I mean, I just found that appalling to me, that whether or not, a woman of means, but that's besides the point. She still had to undergo medical bills, a tremendous amount of physical and mental anguish as a result of this, perseveres for the time being. May she live as long as she can. But I just found that crazy that we have a 7-mile cutoff, and I don't even know if you had heard of that or if I'd ever
Yeah.
shared that with you. And I just thought crazy.
Well, I did know about it because my office was located just below 14th Street, and that was one of the barriers. So I was able to, because my office was below 14th Street, I had to shut my office.
Right.
No, there was nothing that could happen, and so we actually could apply for compensation for the days that were out of business. We were out of business, basically. So I was doing Witness of Hope, which was a charity event, but most everybody was out of business. I mean, obviously, I didn't suffer as much as others, but you always wonder about the health thing. I mean, I always wondered about that as well. I mean, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I lived just in that vicinity. You always wonder, was it the air? In my case, I don't think it was, but I think that and we know for a fact that many people who did work at Ground Zero, many of the first responders were diagnosed with serious health conditions because the air was toxic, and the air remained toxic for a very, very long time. Really a long time.
In her case, she was out on Long Island, but once again, there's no barrier saying, okay, don't go beyond this point, and she was, I guess, the doctors designated or deemed that was as a result of 9/11. So again, I just thought I'd share that in conjunction with that point in the story. Yeah, amazing. Well, on a lighter note, something I enjoy now and again, let's talk wines, okay? I know, Melanie, probably not so much on the Fearless Fabulous You, but with the show you host with David Ransom, the Connected Table Live, I'm sure you cover that more, wines and wine experts, et cetera, et cetera.
I do. Actually, though, I do cover wine. In December, I did two shows on the topic of wine on Fearless Fabulous You. One I had Karen McNeil, who's the author of the best-selling book, The Wine Bible, on. She's probably one of the top women wine educators and authors, because women now exceed men in consumption and purchase of wine in the United States. We are making the decisions about what we're buying. It's like 57%. So I think that's a pretty big story right there for women and my women audience who loves to drink wine. So we talked about what you could try and how, because women, we also found it in the studies, are more likely to experiment and try new things.
And obviously you go around a lot, and there was something I read as we were preparing for this about Long Island has apparently many good wineries. I mean, we still are doing some of the ones here in Connecticut, but we just went to one recently that we had never been to. We've driven by it for years, and one day we needed a gift for somebody. We go, let's go there, and we did the wine tasting, and $100 and something later, all of a sudden it was like, wow, this is great. When are you folks reopening? So they'll be open again in the spring, so we'll be there. But again, tell us about some tips for a savvy, healthy sipper, because wine, as you said, is really good for you.
Well, it is, and I also want to point out I also did a show on, there was a recent report on linking white wine to melanoma, increased by 14%. People, Caucasians, it was only done on Caucasians who drank white wine, had a higher risk of melanoma. I have some issues with the report and the study, because I think that people who tend to drink white wine and lie out in the sun tend to forget to reapply their sunscreen. And I think it's a lifestyle thing. Here's the reality. One, I'll be clear. All wine consumption, not in moderation. Wine must be consumed this way. Drink wine in moderation, make a good wine. Okay? Drink wine in moderation, make a good wine. So that is the healthiest way to approach wine, preferably with food. Because to me, wine is a condiment. You pair it with food. I can't eat a meal without wine. So it's not something you're just going to be sipping all day in the sun. That can affect you. So to be a savvy sipper, and this is a professional speaking, for women and men, it's 1 6-ounce glass a day is considered moderate consumption. For men, it's 2 6-ounce glasses. You can cut your glasses and do small 3-ounce glasses if you really want to prolong your sipping sensory experience. So you can have a 3-ounce glass or 4-ounce glass of white, a 3 or 4-ounce glass of red, and you're still staying within moderate consumption. So don't fill your glass up to the top. Okay? Sip, don't gulp. It is not a beer that you're gulping. It is wine that you sip. You sip it with food. That's another thing. And then I like to drink water, which slows my consumption of wine. And it also keeps me hydrated, because any alcohol consumption is dehydrating. So my theory is 1 glass of water for every glass of wine. Now, I tend to stretch it because life is short. drink good wine, and I love wine. I can't deny myself the things that give me pleasure. So I tend to stay at 2 glasses of wine, which is a little bit more than the American Institute for Cancer Research recommends, but, life goes on. So that's how I responsibly drink wine. I don't necessarily go to the beach and hang out or the swimming pool in the summer and drink wine. And if I do, I'll wear a big hat. Why? Because for me, very light skin, I do get very sun sensitive when I drink alcohol in the sun. So I know that wear sunscreen, wear a hat, reapply, don't fall asleep drinking wine in the sun, and then you won't, damage your skin. There is a fact that moderate consumption of red wine can be heart healthy. It can be heart healthy. Resveratrol is the component in red wine that is considered good for helping your heart. There's also been studies out there that wine consumption could help with your mind and helping offset the advent of Alzheimer's. Every so often there's a report. Positive sometimes, negative sometimes. You have to read all of them, understand who's funding them, and take them all with a grain of salt and know at the end of the day is moderate consumption.
We have a shot here, if they can pull it up. Now, Melanie was not kidding when she said she does not deny herself the simple pleasures. There's a shot of Melanie with, I want to say it's either a champagne bottle or a large wine bottle. Do we have that shot? And there you go. And I believe I don't think those are Oreos, folks. I think that's caviar. So, I think there's enough for everyone in this studio. So since it's her and I, we'll leave it up to you.
Well, that's one of the wonderful perks of my business is that you get invited to some wonderful. And my husband David is East Coast editor of 3 major wine industry magazines. So,
nice.
Hello, everybody wants him there. And so we do get to attend some wonderful events with the hope that people will, they expect us to write about them, report them, or post great photos on social media. So we're blessed with that, and that is something I'm incredibly grateful for. That I have been able to find a profession that I love what I do. And I do what I love. Absolutely.
Melanie Young, you heard it here, folks, joining us for the hour on Studio 411, MelanieYoung.com, amongst all the other blogs, Twitters, LinkedIn, you name it. We'll try to run it down before we end today. Let's talk about, obviously, something even more near and dear, breast health awareness, which, again, I read something recently, should be something 365 days of the year. For men and for women and for men. That was interesting, and I'll share this again. Not necessarily breast health, but I know recently, as we get a little older, I started. My wife, who's very fair skinned, like you mentioned, you tend to be. Goes for like once or twice yearly, kind of a full body checkup, and I decided, as I get to my early 40s, yes. All of a sudden I decided, I want to do that as well, because you never know. If something pops up, it could be whatever they call them, little bibbles or something, and next thing you know, oh, no, don't worry about it. And then a year or two later, oh, yeah, full-blown melanoma. So, I said, well, let me do that. But you talk about breast health awareness for both genders. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, as I said earlier, 1 in 8 women in our lifetime will be diagnosed with breast cancer, but men, a smaller percentage, but men can also get breast cancer. And you can also get breast cancer. I have heard, sadly, of diagnoses of young girls, age 12 or 13, who get breast cancer. It is indiscriminate that way. The average age of women who get breast cancer is 50. The guidelines are to start getting baseline mammograms at 40. There's been some controversy about that. And recently, the American Cancer Society, I think, the guidelines were lifted to start at 50. I support 40. The reason that they lifted is there have been some false positives, which have led to unnecessary surgery. So you cannot be, it's a very serious topic. First of all, I do believe in breast health 365 days a year. While I appreciate breast cancer awareness and all the cancer awareness months, it's something you need to commit to for all of your head to toe health every day of your life.
And I think when you were on the last time, we talked about what you mentioned about whether it should be at 40, 45, 50. Some of that is driven by the insurance companies who want it stretched out longer. We'll call it.
I think so too. But I think at the end of the day, here's the reality. You need to understand, first of all, your family history, because if you have a family history of breast cancer, there means it could be passed down. Two, you don't, and it could mean it's potentially genetic, but not always. I want to be very clear. Just because you have a family history of breast cancer does not mean you have a genetic mutation. You have to be tested. Second, if you if you are overweight and you smoke or you have cystic breasts, you need to watch that, because obesity can impact your risk of cancer. Smoking can impact your risk. Alcohol consumption can impact your risk of cancer. So there are things that can impact your risk of cancer if you have a sedentary life. These are all important. So I do support at 40 a baseline mammogram, but I also strongly believe in self-examinations always, every month. That's how I found the lump in my breast, not through a mammogram.
Sure.
And here's how I think: if I had waited to 50 to start having mammograms under the new guidelines, my cancer already would have been there.
Right.
I was diagnosed at 50. So I think you just have to be very proactive. Now, that said, if you find something, if something is found, you cannot go into a free fall panic. It may not be cancer. It could be a cyst. It could be other things. You have to go through a battery of tests, CAT scans and ultrasounds, and you'll go through more types of more in-depth mammograms to see really what it is. So you cannot start panicking and assuming. You can't jump to conclusions. You can't make hasty decisions. It is something you have to weigh based on your family history, based on your age, based on what the diagnosis is. If it is a carcinoma, which is a tumor, then you have to decide how you're going to handle that, and you have to get first, second, and third opinions, because the issue is a lot of women were having prophylactic mastectomies, and they were having healthy breasts removed. That is an issue, and that is not always covered by insurance.
Right. I was going to say to you whether to get a second opinion. You take it that much further, a third, fourth if necessary, because there have been instances where, despite these different layers of tests and procedures, it's still who's looking at that evidence, or it could be there and they misdiagnose it or they don't see it, and then of course, well, who pays for that? Well, I don't mean in a monetary sense. I mean with your potential life, your health is you the patient.
Well, you should be very familiar with your health insurance. Most health insurance do allow for a second opinion, but some may not pay for a third. So you have to be very cognizant, and you need to call your health insurance and say, look, I have a suspicious mammogram. I want to go and get some more work done. I want to maybe see another doctor. Can I go out of network, in network? I mean, honestly, getting sick is a very expensive experience, whether you're in network or out of network, but you want to stay in your network if that's part of your insurance program. So you need to really know what your best options are. Take your time before you make the decision of how you want to manage it if you are at that point where you are diagnosed. You do have options. Here's my theory. You may not choose to have breast cancer, but first of all, you can choose how to take care of yourself to reduce your risk. But if you get breast cancer diagnosis, it's obviously not by choice, but you have many choices how you want to be treated and how to treat yourself afterwards. So you've got to be very thorough and understand what's the best option for you, not what your friend did or not what Jim Celebrity did or not what somebody's telling you to do. You've got to do what you know in your heart is best for you with the guidance of a board-certified, qualified medical practitioner.
Absolutely. Melanie Young joining us here on Studio 411 in our remaining segment. It took you 30 years, I'm told, my sources tell me, of suppressed feelings to deal with your own experience of having been sexually harassed in the workplace. We might have touched on this last time you were here. What advice do you have for young women? Because we even had a lady on, a comedian on about a year ago, who actually went through something similar at working at a gym, a comic, but to supplement their income was doing that, and all of a sudden, basically, and confronted the individual and said, no, that's not allowed. And of course, again, different scenarios, different situations. In your case, like many time in the media with female reporters, and I'm sure in advertising or different things, sometimes you're hesitant because people fear, well, if they don't kind of follow or let it go, or maybe I'm misreading the signals, that could cost me a job or could cost me an account. So is that kind of what you felt at the time as well?
Yes, I mean, sexual harassment and sexism can take many forms. In my case, I was working at a public relations agency. I was doing very well, very successful. I had a boss. He was male, and he was a friend. We were friendly because you were friendly with your boss, and we both liked tennis. So we go play tennis together, and I thought nothing of it. But there came a time where he was a bit inappropriate. He tried to kiss me. He put his arms around me, tried to kiss me, actually over the net. And it freaked me out because, he had offered to help me, and I confided in him that I was having trouble making ends meet, and I did that as a friend, and he offered to write checks. And I didn't think that was, the checks I thought was generous, but I never thought that as harassment. But at the end of the day, the kissing attempts crossed the line. He was my boss, and I did not know how to handle it. I actually threw up. When he drove me back, I got sick, and I hit it, and I kind of rebelled at work against him, and it definitely changed the dynamics of the relationship. And eventually, I ended up leaving the company because I was deemed a little bit rebellious and not, I wasn't respecting authority. He's the one who should have left, but I never talked about it, and I only really talked about it when the topic became fairly large. In the past months, there's a lot of newscasters have come out.
I was going to say, so you heard some of the thing, and I won't mention the individual or the network, but it reminds you of an animal, if that makes any sense. The name of the network, and all of a sudden, then of course, I'm sure that all kind of like. You went through maybe some kind of flashing back to, hey, this is very similar to what I've been through. Well,
actually, it's not just me. There were reports, articles like that many women, because of this, it dug up, as it did with me, such deep-rooted feelings of what happened to you that many women have come out since to talk about it. My advice to any young woman or women of any age who feel they are having a situation where there is inappropriate behavior, and you need to find inappropriate. It doesn't have to be what we call sexual. It could be sexist. It could be verbal. The point is, if it is someone that you're reporting to or a colleague, you need to go to Human Resources and report it. You're not tattling. You cannot work or live in a situation where you are clearly uncomfortable or made to feel uncomfortable or inferior, and you need to address it. And it's hard. I mean, we've seen it, with what happened with Monica Lewinsky. I mean, it happens at every level, and it's unfortunate. At the time, I lacked the maturity to deal with it the way I would now, and I think it's hard when you're young, but it is not going to get you in trouble. And I'm going to say that. And yet I also know, Larry, in my heart, I have had friends who worked on Wall Street who were sexually harassed, and they filed lawsuits, and they were not hireable again. And once that got out, nobody touched them. So it's a very sad thing. It's a double-edged sword in some cases. But you got to follow your heart, because you should never be in a situation where you're living in an inappropriate situation.
Underlying blacklisted is basically what you're saying at that point with those folks.
I have friends who were blacklisted because they filed lawsuits, and it's wrong. That's wrong. But it does happen, and we have to keep fighting for it.
To jump back to some of the medical points we were talking about earlier, interesting bit of tidbit here I found. Medical errors, the third leading cause of death in the U.S. Now, I'm going to say cancer's number one, correct? Still, after all the various forms, some have been controlled. I'm going to say probably heart disease is second.
Heart disease is number one.
Oh, number one. Okay, so we have made then strides. And heart disease, is that
stroke?
Oh, stroke. But I'm saying
heart disease and stroke are in the top three in the cancer.
Do you think that some of that is because we have the advancements, but that people not enough are getting regular checkups, that maybe some of those things, the high cholesterol, some of the other things, maybe doing the riding the bike in the doctor's office where they do a stress test. You think a lot of folks aren't doing that, and then all of a sudden, boom, there they go. I mean, we had a situation.
Larry, it's a fact. 90% of all diseases are lifestyle related. 90%. Only 10% are genetic, and that's cancer, heart disease, you name it, 90%. That means we are not taking care of ourselves, which is why I became a certified health coach, because I want to walk the walk and talk the talk. That means keeping your weight down to a weight for your size, exercising, not smoking, wearing sunscreen, watching your stress, creating healthy relationships with yourself and those with you, and being vigilant about going to the doctor and getting, tested when you're supposed to, getting inoculations, doing the mammograms, and that's in the case of cardiovascular disease, obesity, smoking, too much alcohol consumption, and not exercise, a sedentary lifestyle. That is the primary reason. Those are primary reasons people get cardiovascular disease and stroke and high blood pressure. And that high blood pressure is, tied to your diet, lack of exercise, obesity, and smoking and stress.
And briefly talk on the 4 signs of spotting a stroke. We refer to them as FAST, fast, but you know them better, or hopefully.
Let me see if I don't know if I can remember my heart. I can tell you that you got to look at the face.
Yeah.
So one thing is, because having just gone through this recently in a person, their face may start to droop.
Yeah.
And lose. Their arms and their side of their body will start to go. Yeah. They will slur, not be able to speak. Their speech may be off. And I don't know what the T is for. I can't remember. But time.
Yeah.
Because there's a window of time where something can be diagnosed as a stroke, and you've got to act fast. So if you have a loved one or a friend who their gait is off, they have a clear weakness on one side of their body, their speech is starting to slur, and you see a clear droop, and maybe they're not focusing with their eyes. That's another one. That most likely means they could be, not necessarily, could be having a stroke and need to act fast and take them to a doctor immediately. Emergency room, not a doctor.
Oh, absolutely. Emergency room for sure. Well, yeah. I tell you, we have a couple of points. I'm making a note here that when Melanie and I regroup in, who knows, could be tomorrow, could be in a year from now, I will cover the points that we didn't talk about. As I said, she is just a wealth of information. Again, as you heard say, certified health coach, radio host, author. The woman is a whirlwind, and again, just a pleasure when she can make time to join us here, in this case, in the lovely state of Tennessee. And now she and Mom will go out and have a healthy, conscious meal for sure, with a little 4 drinks, 2 glasses of water, and 2 glasses of wine. I almost said 2 bottles of wine. No, that would be if she came to my house. There we go. So, Melanie, I want to thank you so much for joining us. We're out of time. Thank you for playing the game. And
well, it's my pleasure. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, Larry. It really is.
Thank you. You hang in there for a second, and we've come to the end of another episode of Studio 411. Larry Dasilva, thanking you for joining us, and we will see you again next time. Take care.